I first saw Yamamoto's work at an APAD fair about 20 years ago. I wasn't exhibiting, I was there as a visitor. And I walked into Yancey Richardson's booth, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw this little uh, wooden box filled with tiny photographs that looked like little pieces of treasure. And I thought I would do my usual thing by looking at what was on the walls first, and then I circled back to this box. But at the time I came to it, it was overtaken by more than a few people sort of rummaging through this box, manhandling all these photographs. And I asked Yancey what was going on, and she had told me about Masao Yamamoto and how he eschewed traditional presentation techniques. So he didn't think much of frames and mats and having photographs on the wall, but felt that everyone should have their own box of prints that they can look at and take out and admire. And I kind of understood where he was coming from, but to see everyone thumbing their way through them just was a little off-putting. Luckily, there was a book that hadn't been handled too much, so I purchased my first book of Masao's, and now I think I have 6 or 7 of them. And but it wasn't until years later that I was able to meet him in person. He came to visit me in Toronto at the suggestion of a friend, and by this time he had stopped that practice, that with all of his photographs, the print is the most important element for him. And the way he makes them is to try to put the viewer, or tries to make the viewer imagine that they were made decades previously. And so he's using different toners. Sometimes he'll apply colors, sometimes he'll scratch prints, but he does things to the print itself to make it look older than it is. And at the time he thought that by having people manhandling them, it would also add patina. But at some point he determined that that was too much patina. And so now, after he makes one of his prints, it very carefully is kept in a mylar envelope until it's purchased and then mostly put into a frame where it's protected for longevity. Masao feels a very close connection to the natural world and really thinks that people at a very minimum should take 10 minutes out of each day to admire and contemplate some natural element. So it removes us from our day-to-day, removes us from the man-made world, and brings us back to something a bit more elemental. And his photographs offer that same opportunity. What he photographs is a variety of different subjects, mostly from the natural world, but sometimes they're still life, sometimes they're landscape, sometimes it's figurative. Each one, though, is like its own exploration and doesn't have too much of a narrative connection to other photographs that he's made, but each one stands on its own. And they can be photographs of birds, which is a matter of interest for him. Most recently, he's been photographing bonsai trees. But in each case, it's the print that is the important thing for him. And so much so that he doesn't reveal to us when the negative was made, because for him, it's almost inconsequential, because what the viewer is looking at is a print. And he'll tell us when the print was made. And they're all titled and numbered and stamped on the back of the print, but the date of the negative remains a bit of a mystery. And he prints within an edition, varying sizes. Some are as small as 10, I think, and some are as much as 40. But each print in that edition is different from the ones that precede it or the ones that follow it. And they could be different in terms of the size. So some might be as small as a postage stamp. Some could be, verging on about 8 by 10 inches. Some are treated differently, like some are, using a warmer tone than others. Some he distresses, so he might rip a piece of the corner of a paper, and a lot of times he'll use pigments, and with his hand he'll apply pigments to different areas of the print to make it look different. He also will use melted gold leaf and sort of flick that onto a print in some cases. But with each one, I think he uses it as an opportunity to enjoy himself in the darkroom, because he's quite a master printer of using gelatin silver papers and traditional wet darkroom techniques. And I think he enjoys his time there and really uses the occasion of making a new print as a new experience with that negative and trying to create something for the very first time. Collectors are drawn to Yamamoto's work for a few reasons. That people that are familiar with the history of photography are intrigued by his work because they try to place it in an era that's much earlier than he's photographing, and they're quite delightfully surprised when they find out that these prints were made within the last 10 years versus 40 or 50 years ago. So I think they admire his ability to work with the history of photography and making contemporary photographs. There's the sheer beauty of them that, there's always this distinction between the photographic image and the photographic object. And in the case of Masao, the content is usually superseded by the image quality and just how beautiful he's rendered the forms of what he's photographing, but also using the light that falls on his subject matter, the way he frames the photographs. Like his compositions are quite varied, but delicate. And then it gets into the printing itself, that each one is slightly unique than others. So people, especially that are becoming most used to seeing digital prints that aspire to be identical. So if you have an edition of digital prints, and let's say there's an edition of 10, the photographer in those cases is trying to make each one absolutely identical to the others. In Masao's case, he's working very hard to make each one unique. So although there's other variants of that print out there, there's not going to be any two that are identical. And he works very hard at that. And I think that is an area of delight for clients because they have something that's unique to them and no one else has something that looks exactly like it.